What's going on, Daytona fans? Welcome back to a very special 10 facts from the automotive world. This particular episode is from my personal history. So it's a very, very tiny contribution to the automotive world, but you know what? It's there. These are 10 cars that I've owned so far. That's right. In my 15 years of driving, I've owned approximately 10 cars, and that includes the Daytona and the Ranger that I own right now, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's start with car number one, and that number one is the 1992 Honda Civic EX. Now, this was my very first car. I got it as a way to learn how to drive manual. It was a piece of crap. You know, when it rained, it leaked, and whenever I stalled out, because it was a manual, whenever I stalled out, it would take 2 minutes before it started right back up again. I don't know why, but if I stalled out and I turned the key, it would only turn the engine. It wouldn't start the car, and for some reason, it just needed a 2-minute break. And you know what? The first time I took it home, I stalled out. And guess what? Oh, the world honked at me for 2 minutes until I could get it going again. But you know what? That's what first cars are. They're supposed to be crap. They're supposed to be just cars to get you to learn how to drive. They're not supposed to be anything fancy. There's something that you can bang up and, you know, not lose sleep over it. Number two, my second car was a 2005 Acura RSX Type S. That thing screamed to 8,000 RPM. And that was a red line. It was such a blast driving it. I put a obnoxiously loud exhaust on it, so no matter where I went, everybody heard me. Whether it sounded good or not, that's a different story. And I definitely did like the car. However, it felt like I was driving a wooden bench. The suspension was so stiff, and every little bump was just so terrible on me. And you know what? It got to the point where it wasn't fun anymore, mostly because in the lower RPMs, there was nothing there. It felt like I was driving something that had worked out all day, and it's just barely getting by when I'm cruising around 30. But of course, when I hit it up to 7,000, 8,000 RPMs, that's when the fun kicks in. That's when the VTEC comes in. I mean, it comes in earlier, but that's when VTEC happens. And you know what? It doesn't make any sense for me to be in first and second gear at about 7,000 RPMs in the city. So, you know, it was a great car, but in long term, it wasn't good comfort-wise, and it wasn't good in the city and low-end power-wise. Number three, I traded that RSX Type S in for a 2003 350Z. That's right, I owned a Nissan 350Z at some point. And I absolutely loved that car. It was one of my dream cars at the time, and I was very, very happy to own it. It was the first generation VQ motor, so I believe it had 268 horsepower. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not too familiar with those engines these days, but I really, really enjoyed it. The downside to that was there was no trunk. You know, if you watch any of the reviews these days, they'll tell you the same thing. There's a huge, huge sway bar right in the middle of the trunk, and the trunk is maybe this deep. So when I was in school, I'd throw my backpack in there, and the backpack would be touching the sway bar. You know, that's how little space there was. I couldn't put groceries in there. I couldn't put anything but a backpack, maybe a coat. You know, if I wanted to put skis or sleds or anything like that, anything sports related really, that is taller than a soccer ball and longer than, I don't know, the length of my arm, it was just not reasonable. And as fun as that 350 was, I really thought I was going to own it, but gas prices shot up to the point where I couldn't actually afford gas and pay for the car. So that brings us to car number four. And the fourth car was a 2009 Toyota Matrix. What a fall from grace that was. Oh my goodness. So I worked at a Toyota dealership at the time, and I talked to the salesman, and they were able to get me into a Matrix for, I believe, $500 over what they paid. And that was very, very generous of them, of course, because, you know, I was an employee there, and I was friends with some of the salesmen. I was friends with a lot of the staff there, and I guess you could say I was somewhat respected, so they gave me a very fair deal. I drove that Matrix for approximately 6 months, and I just abused it. I didn't like it at all. You know, the first month was okay, but then after that, I realized what I had done, and I absolutely hated the car. It was during the winter time, and I remember plowing snow with the Matrix. There was this large snowbank, and I just didn't care. I just drove right into it to clear the snow. It scratched up the bumper. Didn't care. Didn't care about the car at all. And towards the end of that life, and towards the end of owning that car, I really just had to get out of it. I mean, I guess it was comfortable, but it just wasn't me. It was a very neutral car, to me, a very boring car. Not to say that it's a boring car in general, but it wasn't the car for me. So I traded in the winter, and I waited to trade it in the winter. So I bought it probably at the end of one winter and traded it in the beginning of another winter. So I drove it, throughout spring, summer, and fall, and then come winter time, I traded it in when it snowed. And the reason why I did that was because I knew there were scratches. I knew there were, dings and dents. So I waited for a big snowstorm, and then, they salted the roads. The snow turned into slush, and the slush turned into black slush and all that stuff. And all of the snow was just dirty. So it covered up the car, and that's when I took it into trade, because I knew that the salesman was not going to take the car through the car wash to inspect every little thing. So I traded in the car, and that brings us to car number 5. I traded the car in for a 2009 Mazda Speed 3. And this car was phenomenal. This car I probably owned the longest. I owned it for 4 years. And I really thought that I was going to own this car, pay it off, and it would be mine completely. Title in hand, and I wouldn't have to worry about any more payments. I really love the car. I still do miss it. However, due to financial constraints, I wasn't able to keep the car. I was able to pay for it for the most part, but then it got to the point where my credit cards were being maxed out. Not specifically for the car, but the car didn't help. So I had to get rid of it, and in order to alleviate me trying to max out my credit cards and allow me to pay off some of that debt, I traded it in for a regular. Alright, before we continue with my long list of cars, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The more interaction we have with my videos, the more likely YouTube will showcase them to newer people. And the more newer people we get, the bigger the conversation can be. And of course, I would love to talk to everybody. I'd love to learn from you all, and I hope you're all learning from me to a certain extent. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Mazda 3, and I believe that one was a 2013 Mazda 3. So it's just one of those regular Sky Active ones, and that was a lease for 3 years, I believe. And I drove it for about 2.5, and I traded in early only because the seats were so bad, and there was nothing really wrong with the car. The car performed as it should. It was one of those neutral cars where I didn't really have feelings for it, just like the Matrix, but I didn't hate it like the Matrix. I just drove it just to get it over with kind of thing. But I had to trade it in early because the seats were so stiff that I started having back pains. And that was just the first experience of a terrible car seat design. It got to the point where I started taking the train and the bus because the seats hurt me so bad. And I tried to just, stick it out and try to get to the end of the 3-year lease, and that way I can get rid of it. But I needed the car too much too often, and I couldn't rely on public transport, so I had to get rid of it early. And boy, was I happy to get rid of it, because it's just, let me tell you, when I say I got in for 5 to 10 minutes and I had to get out, I meant it. My lower back was just killing me. I don't know what it was about those seats, but they were just no good for me. Which brings us to car number 7. Car number 7 is going to be a Hyundai Veloster turbo. Now that little car was actually very, very cool. It was a coupe, a sedan, and a hatchback all in one. And what I mean by that is the driver's side had one door, the passenger side had two doors. So the driver's side was a coupe, the passenger side was a sedan. And then of course around back in the trunk was a hatch, so that made it a hatchback as well. So it was three cars in one. It was a 1.4 liter turbo or 1.7. It was one of those. But anyway, it was a tiny little four-cylinder with a turbo. It had a lot of get up and go, mostly because the car was very light. And I had a lot of fun with that car. And the reason why I got rid of it was really, I don't know why. I thought that was another car that I was going to keep for a very long time. But when my brother was ready to trade in his car, he was looking into BMWs. We went to the dealership together, and I fell in love with the next car. And that's really the reason why I traded in. There was nothing wrong with the car. I think the car had 12,000 miles on it. That Hyundai, it was very, very low mileage, and I really had no reason to get rid of it except for the fact that I drove a BMW, and it was just this whole new experience. It felt completely different from everything I've driven. So let's get talking to the 2013 BMW 335 Xi sedan. Now this sedan, as you know already, came about when my brother was looking for a new car. He wanted a BMW as well, but he wanted it first. So I sort of end up copying him, and you'll see this theme later on too. He ended up with a 535 Xi, and that's a beautiful car all on its own. But he drove the 335 and didn't like it because he is a man of comfort, and 335 was just too sporty. So when he got into the 535, he fell in love with it. It had ample power. That straight six with a turbo was just phenomenal. You know, it got him where he needed to go, and if he needed to pass anybody on the highway, he had no issues. He didn't have to worry about really putting himself in danger because the car wouldn't accelerate fast enough. That straight six, and it was punchy, and the delivery was very, very quick. So with that said, I drove a 335 while he was shopping around for cars, and I fell in love with it. You know, just the engine alone was buttery smooth. The turbo kicked in, I think below 2,000, and that was max torque at like 2,000 or 1,800 or something like that. They designed that straight six to be just so smooth in power delivery. It was very, very linear. It wasn't like the RSX I had where it was just nothing, and when VTEC kicked in, it shot up. That linear power band made accelerating incredible. There's a developing theme here, and I just want to stop for a sec. I tend to get rid of cars for no good reason. Pretty much every car that I've traded in had no issues, except for the 92 Civic. That first one, you know, the first car is a throwaway car, but every car after that could have easily lasted me 100,000 miles. But I just have this bad habit of switching up cars, and I think I know why. I'll tell you all at the end, but let's keep going. So I had the 335, and that's car number 8. Car number 9 is the Dodge Charger Daytona. Now, again, the 335 was completely fine, nothing wrong with it, but I saw the Daytona that I drive now for a killer deal. And I've always wanted a Dodge Charger. Ever since the 2008 Charger SRT8, I've been a Charger fan. You know, I've been a Charger fan regardless if it was a V6, V8, SRT. You know, I really wanted that generation SRT8. But you know what? I bought the car in 2018, last year. I bought the Charger last year. So obviously by that time, that body style had retired, and it was in, I believe, what is it, the third iteration of the current Charger. So I was just browsing the internet for no apparent reason. I like to look at cars.com and all these automotive sites just to see, oh, you know, if I needed a car, what could I afford? Like, oh, there's this, there's that. And then when the Charger came up, I fell in love with it instantly. You know, not only because it was yellow, but also the price was very good. It's stickered for $45,000, and they were trying to sell it for $38,000. And the reason for that was because it was a 2017, and it was still in their lot in March of 2018. So what that meant was that, you know, obviously cars are manufactured in different months. So what that means is, my guess is it was at least 4 to 5 months at that point at their lot. And a 2017 is something that they want to get rid of. The last year models, the dealership just wants to get rid of that, regardless of how special the car is. And in this situation, it is exactly that. This car is a very rare car, but they just wanted it gone. So they were asking $38,000, and through back and forth negotiations, we agreed to $36,000. So that's what I bought the car for, excluding tax, title fees, and whatever else, you know, all the other stuff that doesn't involve the price of the car. So I now have a Dodge Charger Daytona. Absolutely love it. And I always say this, you know, it's something that I wish to keep for a very long time. I think this will be different this time, mostly because I've always wanted a Charger. I've always had a soft spot for Dodge Chargers, and now that I have one, you know what, I love it. And just, let's see, 6 months later, the Ford Ranger came in. A 2002 black Ford Ranger FX4. Now, I bought this car specifically because I bought the Daytona. I was going to garage the Daytona and drive the Ford in the winter. The Ford can eat up the salt and cut through the snow because it's a 4x4. So in September of 2018, I came into possession of this Ford Ranger. And I knew right off the bat that it was going to be a project. It wasn't a car that I could just pay for, put gas in, and be done with it. I knew that it needed work, and there was nothing wrong with that, but I come to find that there was a lot more to do than I thought. And, you know, the dealer kind of lied to me. Not kind of, they did lie to me. It's basically a truck with more problems than I wanted it to be. But nonetheless, I have it. I have fixed most problems. I'm still waiting for a day where it's sunny. I got some wiring left to do, and that'll be it. You know, and at that point, all the truck needs is gas and a driver. So I'm very, very close to getting it up to my standard of what a car should be. You know, there's definitely rust, there's rot holes in the truck bed. There's nothing I can do about that. If I can get my hands on a very cheap truck bed that's in great condition, I'll try to see what it takes to replace it. You know, and maybe I could do a nice video on a truck bed replacement. I think that's going to be a very, very big project that I won't be able to do in a day, but we'll see. So that concludes the 10 cars I've owned since I started driving 15 years ago. So if we average that out, that's just maybe what, a year and a few months before I switch cars. It's a lot of cars, and I'm looking to stop that cycle. You know, I'm looking to stop that cycle with the Daytona and the Ranger. The Ranger is completely paid for. I have the title in hand, which is great. So all I'm worried about now is the Daytona. The Ranger will eventually fail. It's an '02. It's rusty. It's got rot holes. I don't expect it to last as long as the Daytona. But, you know, when the frame fails, that's when we get rid of it. And at that point, I'll have to move on to the next car, whenever that may be. Alright, Daytona fans, that's it for this video. In the comments section below, please let me know if any of these cars surprised you. Let me know how many cars you've owned since you started driving. You know, I'd love to start a conversation with you all, and I know I can't be the only one who's got the itch to switch cars. But anyway, that's it for this video. You all have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.